Your book, of course, is filled with examples of historical occasions when there have been technological breakthroughs. So one of the things you talk about in your book is the space race. And I feel like this is sort of remembered as this a big occasion where lots of different people and teams from across the US sort of came together to get first man on the moon. But and it was sort of all about the goal of advancing science. So is that a rose-tinted view of what happened, or is it accurate?
It's perhaps slightly rose-tinted, but I think that's part of what's so interesting about the story. So it really is an incredible technological achievement. And in that way, there's no rose tinting about it. It's an amazing feat to have set this ambition and then been able to fulfill it, which was by no means certain. But I think it's also, and this is what I write about, particularly in my chapter on space in the book, it's also an incredible feat of diplomatic and legal innovation, as well as technical innovation. And that's what I'm super interested in, is the politics behind these stories. I think that technology is so deeply political, and we don't think about it that way often. But if you think about choices that are made, trade-offs that are made, what gets funded, what doesn't, who works on what, those are all pretty political questions. And in the case of the space race, Kennedy wasn't actually that interested in space in and of itself, but he just wanted to find a platform, a sort of competitive space that he thought the United States could beat the Soviet Union. And that was for geopolitical goals. He felt that if he could show off the might and the talent and the ability of sort of free science in the United States, that might encourage other non-aligned countries and people considering the two models to come more around towards the US's way of thinking. And, also he was thinking about war. I mean, this was the Cold War. It's, not very long since the Second World War. And it was a very, very dangerous time for the entire planet because of these two nuclear powers and this very real threat of nuclear war. So the capabilities put into space technology were often about spying satellites, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and these kinds of things. So what's interesting then is we now look back on space as this incredible moment of sort of unity and scientific achievement, but it's based in these very sort of, political decisions and maybe sometimes cynical, nationally interested decisions. But I think what that teaches us for AI is that actually you can have something that is, you're concerned about from your own self-interest, but you can make decisions that try and encourage people and inspire people and uplift people, rather than sort of use that competition as something to divide people and create antagonism and tension. People say now that, well, you can't possibly have cooperation. It's too much of a sort of tense and uncertain time geopolitically. But of course, you couldn't get something more tense than the height of the Cold War. And yet against that backdrop, we were able to see the United Nations Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which, as I write in the book, legally determined that when they did finally set foot on the moon a couple of years later, they did so first and foremost as representatives of humankind and of their nation state second. That UN treaty determined that space was the province of all mankind and not just something that whoever got to the moon first. They may have planted a flag on it, but they didn't own the moon, and they certainly didn't plant nuclear weapons on it, pointing down at their adversaries. So these are decisions that politicians can make, that builders can make, that society can make. The space race was actually quite unpopular for a while, and that caused some real tension over the funding for it. So there's just these fascinating aspects, I think, of these stories that are really under if not under research, certainly underreported, and people are less aware of. And I think that leads us perhaps not necessarily to rose tinted glasses, but to miss some really key parts of the puzzle.
Okay. It's kind of fascinating, the idea that Kennedy didn't really care about the space itself. It was all about the geopolitics and the military aspects of this, and the science was just a sort of side effect.
when it came to science, he was most interested in desalination. If he could, get drinking water from seawater, that was actually his kind of scientific passion that he was interested in. But you couldn't afford to do both. Not necessarily in terms of funding, although that was a big part of it. As I say, it cost a lot of money to go to the moon, and Congress often weren't happy, and citizens often weren't happy with that. But also, political time and attention is very is a sparse resource, and there's only so much effort he could put into corralling and using his kind of dynamism and his kind of magnetic leadership powers to encourage people towards a goal. So in the end, for geopolitical goals, he picked space. But in the book, I quote these amazing recordings we have of him talking in the Oval Office to his head of NASA, where he says, "I'm not that interested in space. Why are we spending all this money on space rather than maybe cancer research, for example? The reason we're doing it is to beat the Soviets," which really shows, I think, kind of why this was done. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't also a really inspiring, incredible technology. I think you can do both if you think carefully about it.
And for people who are involved in either creating AI or were involved in maybe creating policy decisions about AI, how should they try and replicate those sort of positive effects where you have that sort of inspiring moment and then you're avoiding sort of some of the thornier issues around like military uses and things like that?
Well, I mean, look, AI is going to be used in the military. It already is. So I think the people building AI need to think carefully about just what the purpose is of what they're building, why they're doing it. And it may be that that's what they want to work on. But if they're trying to aim for an inspiring moment that gets people excited and attempts to sort of uplift and help support the most amount of people they can around the planet, then they should be thinking carefully about what the purpose is of what they're building. So, that really is a decision that should be made at the start, I think. And I write about this in the book in terms of what's your purpose? Why are you doing that? I mean, my former employer, for example, DeepMind, this founder and CEO there feels very strongly about AI for science, AI to help scientists and to turbocharge science, which might help the planet with some really tricky problems. I think that's a really noble way of looking at AI. Can we use AI to help with the climate crisis? Can we use it to help, do advanced diagnostics and reach diseases sooner? These are incredible things. So it just really comes down to intentionality. Do you know why you're building what you're building?
Okay, having a reason for like why you're doing something, that sounds like an excellent idea. Maybe often overlooked.
I think sometimes it is, or sometimes the reason is just to make money, and there's nothing wrong with making money, but can that be accompanied by if you want to build something inspiring, then starting from kind of what society do you want to live in, what society do you want to see, what in the future, what are you trying to build, that will really help.